You have no meaning in this house any more." Those words came from my daughter, Clara, calm, deliberate, as if she were reciting a recipe. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even seem angry. She just seemed finished. The living room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. My daughter's husband, Lucas, shifted on the couch, crossing his arms, his smile polite but satisfied. The lamp cast a stark light across the floorboards I'd once sanded with my own hands. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even sigh. I stood there, hands trembling slightly against the leather strap of my old watch. My chest felt empty, like a church after the congregation has left. In that silence, I realized something colder than rejection. They had rehearsed this. But what they would never know, the ones who thought they held all the power, were the ones destined to pay the price. "Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from," Lucas said finally, his voice smooth as butter, as if he were offering coffee instead of eviction. "We don't want this to become dramatic." I turned my head slightly. "Lucas," I said, tasting how quiet my voice was, "you've never liked drama." Clara kept her gaze on the far wall. There was a framed print we'd hung together last spring, a map of the Bodensee with its shoreline etched in blue. Her jaw tightened against the glass reflection. "Fata," she said, "let's keep this adult. We've talked about the situation." A thin manila folder lay half-hidden beneath 3 magazines on the coffee table, an architectural journal, an old hunting catalogue, and a glossy brochure for a spa in Baden-Baden. The folder peeked out just enough for a black scrawl to show like a bruise. Heinrich Schmidt. I watched that scrawl the way you watch a fox slip through the tree-line. Casual, inevitable, calculated. "What situation?" I asked, almost gently. "You know," Clara said, "the arrangement. Since Mutter passed, since you moved in, it's time for better support for you. We found a great place. A facility." Lucas cut in with a small, apologetic shrug. "Not a facility. It's more like community living. Game nights, chef-prepared meals. You'd have your own space." My watch ticked against my wrist, a metronome only I could hear. Old leather, brass buckle, my father's initials faint on the back. I steadied my hands. "This is your decision," I said. "Together." Clara nodded once. The lamplight carved new lines into her face, lines that weren't there when she was 12, asking me if Bayern would finally win the Bundesliga, or 20, calling from university to say she'd landed that internship in Munich. Lines come from choices. Some you inherit. Some you draw yourself. "What happens to my room?" I asked. "What happens to my tools?" "We've made space in the garage," Lucas said, a touch too quickly. Clara cleared a shelf. He turned to her as if I weren't there. "Schatz, we can call Stefan about the truck." "The truck," I said. "The VW," Lucas replied. "It's old, Heinrich. It's not safe for you to drive something that size anymore, but Stefan might give us something for it." I looked at my daughter. She looked at the map. The words "no meaning" don't cut like a blade. They sink. They tilt the floor beneath your shoes. They rearrange the furniture inside your chest until everything feels foreign. They also split time into before and after. Before my daughter rehearsed my erasure, after I learned the choreography. On the coffee table, beside my name, a yellow post-it note stuck out like a small flag. Notary at 7 p.m. The stove clock in the kitchen glowed 7 o'clock. 2 hours. It was neat, efficient. They'd set an appointment to make my absence official. "Let's not decide everything tonight," I said. Lucas smiled again, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "We already found a spot, Heinrich. They held it because Clara explained your background." He gestured vaguely at my knees, at the small cane propped against the bookshelf. They're willing to take you as early as Monday." "And the paperwork?" I asked. My voice stayed level, steady as the tick behind my skin. Lucas reached for the manila folder, slid it free with practiced care. "Just a few signatures," he said, tapping the corner. "Power of attorney for health decisions, so we can act fast when you need help." He glanced at Clara. "And a housekeeping thing about the house, since you co-signed on the refinance last year. To simplify the title, so we can handle bills without bothering you." A housekeeping thing. I looked at the edge of the form peeking out. I've seen many forms. Sometimes the important word is small, easy to miss. Quitclaim doesn't shout. It sits quietly and waits. Clara shifted. "Fata, this is for the best. We've run the numbers. We're already covering groceries, electricity, and subscription services you don't use." Lucas added, "We're not trying to be unkind. It's just, you're not contributing, and emotionally," the word caught in his throat like a seed. "It's not healthy for the kids." They didn't have kids. That, I realized, was the rehearsal talking, a script for an audience that hadn't arrived. Maybe the notary. Maybe the neighbor who'd join for moral support. Maybe the version of themselves they preferred to imagine. Caring adults making hard choices for a difficult old man. The refrigerator's hum pressed louder, as if electricity itself wanted to fill the silence. The house breathed, air conditioning cycling on, a baseboard creaking as the evening cooled. This is what a home does if you let it. It gathers. It holds. It's a chest for things you can't carry in your hands. My daughter, who was born with colic and only slept when I drove her around the block at 3 a.m., was now a woman with a laminated insurance card in her purse and a husband whose tie never loosened. She believed in systems. She believed in signatures. She believed she'd found the form that could turn a father into paperwork. "I'd like some water," I said finally, "if you don't mind." Nobody moved, so I did. I walked to the kitchen, letting the small, ordinary act pry the room loose from me. The switch flicked, fluorescence waking with a faint buzz. I reached for a glass and watched my hand become my father's for a brief second, veins like blue roads, skin announcing itself honestly. I filled the glass and didn't drink. From the doorway, Clara hovered. "Fata, don't read too much into how this sounds." Her throat worked. "At least that was human. We have to draw lines. It's what families do. Families do 1,000 things. They draw lines. They erase them. They shift them when the paper changes. When I think of family, I think of a red wagon in our first driveway, of strep throat at midnight, of a science fair model that wouldn't stand until I used fishing line. I think of my late wife Anna, crying quietly in the pantry after her diagnosis because she'd broken a glass in the sink and thought I'd see her as weak. "Lines," I said. "Sure, we'll give you a minute," Lucas called from the living room. "And then we'll go through the forms together. The notary will be right on time. Don't worry, I already texted him our address." Our address? It lived in more than one place, that phrase. It lived on envelopes from the county treasurer. It lived in the file drawer I kept in the back of the closet behind a folded blanket. It lived, too, in a deposit box on Hauptstrasse, third drawer, second key, because I never learned to trust memory more than paper. I carried the water back to the living room and set the glass on a coaster I'd made from a slice of our old linden tree after last year's storm. Coasters are little promises we make to wood. We won't scar what holds us. "Let me understand," I said, sitting on the edge of the chair with the armrest my Labrador used to chew when thunder rolled. "You want me to sign a power of attorney to you, both of you, so you can make medical choices for me. You want me to sign a quitclaim deed to remove my name from your title, and you want me to move to a community living facility by Monday." "That's correct, Fata," Clara said. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," I replied, not unkindly. "It's okay," If that's what you want, say it how it is. Lucas drew a breath that made his shoulders rise and fall with choreography. We want what's best for you and us. Boundaries, Heinrich. He tilted his head slightly. You always taught Clara to be decisive. She's being decisive. The thing about advice is that it ages. It either becomes wisdom or evidence. I'd said those words once, at a kitchen table with a math worksheet between us and a coffee stain creeping toward the edge. Decisive meant choosing the right answer when you're afraid of getting it wrong. It hadn't meant removing the throat that feeds you. All right, I said, letting the words sit unadorned. All right, Clara repeated, blinking. She hadn't expected that. Not yet. I'll look everything over, I said. I don't sign things I haven't read, and I don't read when I'm thirsty. I lifted my glass finally and took a slow drink. Water, metallic with the faint taste of copper pipes, older than Lucas's patience. You can leave the folder here. I tapped the coffee table. Lucas glanced at Clara. She nodded and nudged the folder forward with 2 fingers, as if it might bite. We'll be in the kitchen, she said, retreating like a deer that heard a twig snap wrong. When they were gone, when the refrigerator's hum reclaimed the house, I opened the folder. I moved pages, not like a man doing what he's told, but like a carpenter measuring twice. The quitclaim was on top. Beneath it, a pre-filled healthcare directive with boxes already checked. Do not resuscitate was, mercifully, blank. A third packet, one that surprised me more than it should have, was a consent to allow the community to manage my mail. I didn't feel anger, not the loud kind. What I felt was a clean border come into focus. On my side, memory, labor, a mortgage payment made on the 1st of every month because that's how you show you're steady. On theirs, a plan designed to be efficient, expedited by a notary who'd smell like peppermint gum and leave a blue stamp on my table. There are different kinds of power. The noiseless one is paperwork prepared ahead of time. The older I got, the more I understood that. When Anna got sick, I learned to keep folders in duplicate, one at home, one away. When Clara bought this house, I learned to read the fine print on a refinance and insisted my name stay where it had always been. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I understood trust and prudence aren't enemies. I closed the folder and let my eyes land on the family photos along the stairway wall. The staircase had a slight creak on the 3rd step, always had. In the photos, time curved back on itself. There was Clara at 6, pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, holding a fish she swore weighed 2 kilos. There was Anna in her navy dress, sunlight in her hair. There I was, younger, wearing a tool-and-die cap, sawdust on my shoulder. I tried to see the line between then and now. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe it had shifted under our feet while we were busy doing dishes. I rose. My knee complained, then settled into quiet. I took the folder with me, not because they'd asked, but because I needed its weight in my hand. In the hallway, I paused and placed my palm on the wall where the paint never quite matched after we fixed a leak in March. The plaster felt cool, as if the house were a body, and I could still find its pulse. In my room, the back bedroom with the window facing the linden stump, I sat at the small desk Anna had insisted we keep because someday you'll want a place to write. The desk had 2 drawers. On the left, a stack of receipts, rubber-banded without elegance. On the right, a spiral notebook with a green cover, the kind you buy at the supermarket when school starts and everything smells faintly of plastic. Inside the notebook, dates ran like fence posts, tidy, square, known. The title on the first page read, in my block print, after Anna. I added today's date. I wrote one line, Clara, you have no meaning in this house anymore. Then I stopped. I listened to the house. I let the words sit on paper like a seed on snow. Some seeds bide their time. The freeze doesn't kill them, it instructs them. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice. Then a text arrived. "Hi Heinrich, this is Klaus, your mobile notary, confirming 7 p.m. I'll bring my stamp and ID scanner. See you soon." Efficient, polite, on schedule. I wrote Klaus, notary beside today's entry and circled it. I drew a small arrow pointing to the word scanner. People forget that paper has a life. Once you record it, it stays recorded, but not always where you think. My fingers found the watch buckle. I turned the face over. The back had a hairline scratch from a winter 2 decades ago, a cold morning carrying a bag of rock salt. My father's initials were there, a faint ghost, HJS. He'd given it to me when I turned 30, and he said, "Time's not a river, Heinrich. It's a workshop. You decide what you make in it." I hadn't understood then what I understand now. Sometimes the thing you make is a boundary. I took a breath that felt like the first one I'd taken all evening. In the closet, behind the folded blanket, the file drawer slid open on its easy rails. Inside was a set of duplicates I kept, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Birth certificates, tax returns, the promissory note from when Clara needed the down payment to close, and the deed of trust recording a private lien in my name. Modest, legal, quietly humming like a refrigerator in a hall. I didn't pull them out. Not tonight. I just let my eyes touch their tabs, like a blind man reading a liturgy he knows by heart. Some men wage war with their throats. I'd long ago learned to wage it with my calendar. I closed the drawer and returned to the desk. The manila folder waited like a test. I opened it again and read each line. I marked a margin with a dot where a phrase drifted too close to a cliff. I looked for the switch hidden in the language, the place a single shall could append a life. I'd been a foreman for 32 years at the factory. You learn to read schematics. You learn that a beam an inch short doesn't fail on day 1. It fails on day 932. Footsteps in the hall. A soft knock. Lucas's voice, sweet as varnish. "Heinrich, we can go through these together if you'd like. Sometimes it helps to have support." "I'll be out in a minute," I said. "Of course," he replied. The syllables floated, then fell. I stood, and for the first time since those first words in the living room, I allowed myself to look in the mirror above the dresser. The man looking back had weather in his face. His eyes were the color of the Bodensee under winter clouds. He didn't look helpless. He looked like a man taking an inventory. When I returned to the dining room, the table was set as if for a small party. Folder centered, pens aligned, a ceramic bowl of wrapped peppermint candies pushed to one side. Clara sat straight, hands folded, the posture of someone preparing to present at work. Lucas had a legal pad open to a clean page with next steps written at the top in careful letters. "Shall we begin?" he chirped. I pulled out a chair and sat. I placed my watch on the table by the peppermint bowl and folded my hands beside it. "Let's read together," I said, line by line. It took 15 minutes to expose the first unsteady nail. "This section," I said, tapping, "assigns durable power to both of you, jointly and severally." Lucas brightened, recognizing a phrase. "It just means we can act if one of us is unavailable." "It means," I said, "either of you can act alone." He blinked once. The pen in his hand stopped its small, eager tapping. Clara swallowed. "Why is that a problem?" she asked. "It isn't if you trust the people acting to be in sync," I said. "But marriages have rhythms. People get tired." I let the sentences be as light as air. "And this clause makes conflict easier, not harder." "Are you accusing us of—" Lucas cut himself off. He smiled again, practicing. "We can cross that out. A lesson my father taught me at 8. People show you their hands when you talk about the weather. They show you their hearts when you talk about time. But they show you their plans when you talk about paper. We continued. Another clause, mail management. Another, authorization for auto-debit of elder care charges from designated accounts. That one made my tongue go dry because designated doesn't mean mine. It means whatever we say aloud while a notary nods. Klaus is here, Clara said suddenly, checking her phone. He's early. Bring him in, I said, as pleasant as Sunday. The more witnesses, the better. Heinrich, Lucas murmured, a warning wrapped in silk. I smiled. Witnesses, I repeated, not signatures. Klaus, the notary, smelled faintly of peppermint gum and printer toner. He was 45, maybe, with a friendly beard and a blue stamp in a zippered case that bulged like a secret. Evening, he said cheerfully. We'll make this quick for you. He peered at me. You must be Heinrich. I must, I said. He opened his case and set out his tools, stamp, journal, ID scanner. It hummed to life with a clean, eager sound, as if it had spent all day waiting for my driver's license. He adjusted his glasses and flipped his ledger open to a fresh page. Now, he said, rubbing his hands together as if starting a barbecue, who's signing what? Lucas started to speak. I lifted my hand a fraction, the kind of fraction you learn raising a daughter, a signal without force. Sometimes the motion is more effective than the volume. Before we sign, I said, we read. I'm old-fashioned. Totally, Klaus said, unfazed. We do things the right way. We read again, out loud this time. The room changed when words left the page and entered the air. They went from ink to definition. They grew in weight. Notary ink is permanent. Spoken promises are not. Somewhere between the two, truth lies down and sleeps. When we reached the quitclaim, Clara cleared her throat. Fata, I won't be signing this tonight, I said. Lucas flinched. Why? Because I won't be moving on Monday, I said, offering no apology for the insolence. Because you scheduled a notary before you had a conversation. Because I poured the footings for this house with Clara while she was still agile with hope. Because your plan is clean but not kind. Because I read. I tapped the margin with my index finger. And because meaning isn't a switch you flip on me. Klaus's eyes flicked between faces. He had the decent instinct to go still. Fata, Clara began, voice low, careful. We're trying to help. I know, I said. And help comes in many shapes. Tonight, it will look like this. You'll leave the folder with me. Klaus will stamp nothing. You'll think about the word designated and what it would feel like if someone you loved designated your life without asking. And I will sleep in my room in this house this week. I let the last two words land. We'll try again when this conversation starts with truth. Lucas pushed back from the table and stood. His chair skidded a half-inch, the sound small, sharp. This is exactly the kind of manipulation. It's a boundary, I said, not unkindly. Those are the lines families draw. Yes, Klaus coughed into his fist and quietly zipped up his case. I can, reschedule, he murmured. No fee. Happens all the time. Thank you, I said. Write your number on that legal pad, please. He did. A simple act. A new line on paper. A seed, too. Lucas left the room. I heard the refrigerator door open, then close. Ice clattered in a glass. Clara stared at the quitclaim like it had betrayed her personally. I don't want a war, she said. Neither do I said. I want respect. It's cheaper. We sat there a moment. Two people in a dining room lit by a lamp older than her marriage, shoulders bent toward a table that had been my father's before mine. My watch ticked beside the peppermint bowl. Fata, she said softly, you make it hard to know how to take care of you. You take care of me by not taking from me, I said. You take care of me by asking before you decide. You take care of me by remembering that meaning isn't measured by rent or noise or how fast I climb the stairs. She looked at her hands. They were good hands. She'd built a garden shed with those hands. Held Anna's hand with those hands when she was dying, when she was 24 and terrified. Hands don't turn cruel. They obey instructions delivered by fear. "Okay," she said, voice rough. "We'll pause." "Good," I said. Pausing is adult. Klaus slipped out. The front door clicked, the sound a notary makes when he leaves a room without stamping anything. Polite, invisible, complete. I picked up my watch and fastened it to my wrist. I closed the folder. "We'll pick this up tomorrow," I said, standing. "I'm going to bed." I took the folder with me, past the staircase photos, past the creak on the third step, past the map of the Bodensee. In my room, I set it on the desk, slid my green notebook on top, and laid my watch on the pile like a paperweight from a different century. Then I turned off the light. The room held its breath. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler ticked like a cheap metronome, stitching the dark with water. I sat on the edge of the bed and let stillness be my answer to the night's rehearsal. Before sleep took me, I did one small thing, the kind no one notices in stories until the end, when they realize it was all a hinge. I opened the drawer, removed an envelope with a name written in my square block letters, Baden title, and placed it beneath the folder. A simple motion, a quiet hook set in deep water. Tomorrow the past would knock. Tonight I chose to hear it, and I chose to be ready when it opened the door. The night after they tried to erase me, I didn't sleep. I sat awake in the dark, listening to the house breathe as if it were still on my side. The hum of the refrigerator was steady in the distance. The pipes clicked as the temperature shifted, and every sound felt like an ally that had stayed when my blood had turned against me. I stared at the ceiling until dawn painted the edges of the curtains, and in that gray half-light, memory returned like an uninvited guest. I remembered Clara at 5, standing at the end of our gravel driveway with a baseball glove too large for her hand. She'd wave it in the air like a flag, begging me to play catch the moment I pulled up from work. My back would ache. My hands would still carry the smell of metal and grease from the factory. But I would always give her again. That word was her anthem. Again. Fata. Again. And I gave it to her, even when I had nothing left. Now, 30 years later, my daughter had sat across from me with a manila folder meant to erase me. And all I could hear was that small girl's voice. It broke me in ways I didn't show and hardened me in ways they could not see. When the morning came, I buttoned a clean shirt and walked into the kitchen, my cane tapping against the floor. Lucas looked up with that polished smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Morning, Heinrich," he said brightly, like a store clerk greeting a customer. Clara sat at the table, her spoon hovering over cereal, her eyes heavy with something she didn't want to say. I poured myself coffee without asking, let the silence speak louder than any words, and sat down. We ate like strangers who had forgotten they once shared blood. Halfway through, I set my mug down and said, as if it were nothing, "I kept the lien from when you bought this house." Clara blinked. Lucas's smile faltered. "What lien?" he asked, too quickly. "The one from the down payment," I said. "You didn't have enough saved. I put in 40%. To make sure you'd get the loan. Paper doesn't age like people do. It stays fresh." Clara shifted in her chair. Lucas pressed his lips together. They said nothing, but the silence told me everything. They had forgotten the seed I planted years ago, but the soil had kept it alive. After breakfast, I walked into the backyard. The grass was wet with dew, the air crisp, and the linden stump from last year's storm still stood like a gravestone. I sat on the bench beside it and closed my eyes. From that place, I could hear Anna again, her voice soft and steady. She used to sit there in her robe with a book in her lap and tell me, "Heinrich, You have to teach Clara patience. She wants everything too fast. I'd laugh and say, "That's youth. Let her run." And she'd answer, "One day she'll forget to stop running. That's when she'll need you most." I whispered into the empty yard, "You were right, Anna. She forgot. But she'll learn. Not through shouting, through truth." When I walked back inside, I caught Lucas on the phone, his tone polite but sharp. "Yes, Friday works. No, he hasn't signed yet, but he will have everything ready." His eyes widened when he saw me. "Just Stefan," he stammered when I asked about the truck. But Stefan didn't work Fridays, and he knew I knew. They were already moving the pieces, arranging to list the house and shove me into a corner of the world I hadn't chosen. I didn't need the whole conversation. I only needed to hear the slip. That was enough. I went back to my room, opened my green notebook with "After Anna" written on the cover, and added today's entry. They have already called for Friday. They think I will sign. They do not know about the lien. They do not know what patience looks like when sharpened. I underlined patience twice. Then I closed the notebook and took the walk I knew would matter. At the bank, the clerk recognized me. "Herr Schmidt, still keeping everything squared away?" she asked cheerfully. "Always," I replied. I asked her to confirm the lien file, update the mailing address, and print the current record of ownership. Everything was intact. My name hadn't moved an inch. As I left, I felt the way Anna used to feel finishing a puzzle, sliding the last piece in place. That lien was my piece, hidden but irreplaceable. On the walk back, old Frau Mahler from next door waved me over. She squinted her eyes and whispered, "Heinrich, I heard Lucas yesterday. Something about listing your house. Is that true, listing?" The words struck me harder than facility or support. Listing wasn't about care. It was about profit. I thanked her, and another piece clicked into place. That evening, we sat at the dinner table. Clara poked at her food. Lucas forced a conversation about the weather and errands, pretending nothing had happened. I let them talk, then said only one thing: "You should be careful what neighbors hear." Lucas dropped his fork. Clara looked at me, then quickly away. That was all I needed. They knew I knew, and they didn't know how much more I had tucked away. Later that night, back in my room, I set the manila folder on my desk, placed the notebook on top, and listened to the clock tick toward midnight. The house creaked, sighed, whispered, as if it remembered who had built it. I whispered into the dark, "They think they hold the pen. But I built the table it rests on." And as I turned off the light, I slid one envelope from my drawer, the one marked Baden title in my handwriting, and tucked it beneath their folder. It was a quiet act, invisible to anyone but me. But it felt like setting a trap in deep water. They believed I was powerless, but they had no idea the foundation under their feet still carried my name. The next morning began with the sound of Clara's footsteps above me, slow and heavy, as if even the boards of the house had started to groan under the weight of what she carried. I lay awake in my room, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling paint, letting the rhythm of those footsteps set the pace of my thoughts. Anna used to say I could think circles around anyone when I stayed quiet long enough. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was just that the quiet gives a man room to remember. And remembering is what I did. When Clara was in high school, she came to me with a panicked look because she had failed her driver's test the first time. She told me she was too embarrassed to tell her friends, too afraid to face them at school. I sat her down in the garage, handed her a soda, and said, "Liebling, failure only stings when you hide it. Once you look it in the eye, it loses its teeth." She didn't like that answer then, but she took the test again the next week and passed. Now, years later, she sat in the same house, trying to hide me away like a failure she couldn't bear to face. It almost made me laugh. Almost. I rose, buttoned my shirt, and slipped my notebook into the inside pocket of my jacket. I didn't write anything yet. I just wanted it close to my chest, like a shield. At the kitchen table, Lucas was already sipping tea, flipping through a glossy magazine. He smiled too easily when he saw me, a performance without rehearsal this time. "Morning, Heinrich," he said. I nodded, poured my coffee, and sat down across from him. Clara entered a moment later, her scarf crooked, her jaw freshly powdered. She looked at me as though waiting for an explosion that never came. I let her wait. Silence is better than shouting. It teaches faster. She cleared her throat, fiddled with her phone, and finally said, "Fata, we should probably reschedule the notary for later this week. Last night wasn't productive." Productive! I repeated, rolling the word slowly across my tongue. That's a good way to describe it. Lucas gave Clara a quick look, the kind couples give each other when they're trying to stay on the same page. "We only want to make sure things are in order, Heinrich. For everyone's peace of mind." "Peace of mind," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Whose mind?" Neither of them answered. Clara adjusted her scarf again. Lucas flipped another page, his eyes never quite meeting mine. I let them stew in the silence until my cup was empty, then stood and carried it to the sink. "I've got errands today," I said. They didn't ask what kind. That was mistake number one. I walked into town slowly, cane tapping, not because I needed the support so badly, but because I wanted to look the part. They expected the fading man, the weak one, the burden. You learn things when people think you're too old or too tired to matter. They forget you can still listen. At the corner bakery, I overheard two men talking about property values rising near the Autobahn. At the post office, a clerk asked if I was finally moving into Silberkiefern, the very community facility Lucas had mentioned. I smiled thinly and told her, "No, not yet." Rumors, it seemed, were already making the rounds. My family had a head start on rewriting me out of my own story. They just didn't know I had already sharpened my pencil. By mid-morning, I reached the law office of my younger brother, Wilhelm. The sign out front was weather-worn but still legible. Schmidt UND Partner, Rexenwald. He wasn't expecting me, but when I stepped inside, he rose from his desk with surprise in his eyes. "Heinrich, verdammt, what brings you here?" I sat across from him, laid my cane gently by the chair. "I need some advice," I said, "and I need it to stay between us." His smile faded into seriousness. "Of course." I told him everything, not in one breath, not in a rush, but carefully, like laying out tools on a workbench. The notary, the quitclaim deed, the facility Clara and Lucas had already chosen, the call about Friday, the whispers about listing the house. Through it all, Wilhelm listened with the patience of a man who has heard worse but still feels the sting when it comes from family. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled. "Heinrich, they don't know what they're walking into. If the lien is still active, if your name is still on the deed, they can't do a damn thing without you. You hold the cards." I nodded slowly. "I know. But knowing isn't enough. I want them to feel it. I want them to understand that trust isn't a signature you squeeze out of someone. It's earned. And if they forgot that, then maybe it's time they relearn." Wilhelm tapped his pen against a yellow legal pad. "We can make this very uncomfortable for them without you lifting more than a finger. I'll draft a notice. It'll remind them that the lien still stands. That way, if they try to refinance or sell without your consent, the bank will block them cold. They'll get the message quick." "Good," I said, "but don't send it yet. Let's wait until they think they've won." His eyes flickered with something like admiration. "You always were the patient one." "Patience," I said, almost smiling, "isn't waiting quietly. It's sharpening quietly." We shook hands before I left, and his grip carried both promise and blood. On the walk home, I thought about Anna again. She used to say, Heinrich, you never raise your voice, you raise the stakes. I hadn't understood then how true that was, how sometimes the quiet man at the table is the one writing the rules of the game. When I stepped through the front door, Clara and Lucas were in the living room, talking in hushed voices. They stopped when they saw me, their eyes darting like guilty children. I didn't comment. I just walked past them, cane steady, and into my room. At my desk, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Met Wilhelm. He knows everything. We wait. They believe silence means surrender. They don't know silence can mean strategy." That evening, Lucas knocked softly at my door. "Heinrich, do you have a moment?" His voice carried that edge of politeness that hides a knife. I opened the door. He stood there holding a casserole dish. "I made extra tonight. Thought you might like some." I looked at the dish, then at him. "Thank you," I said, taking it. Our eyes held for a beat longer than courtesy required. He wanted to see if I'd reveal something. Fear, maybe, or gratitude he could twist later. I gave him nothing. When I closed the door, I set the dish on the desk beside the folder, untouched. Food offered out of guilt never sits well in the stomach. The house was quiet after dinner. Clara retreated to the garage, Lucas to his phone calls. I walked the hallway slowly, my cane tapping against the wood floor, and paused by the family photographs on the wall. There was Clara at 10, holding a model airplane we built together. There was Anna, laughing at something behind the camera. There I was, younger, holding a fishing rod with Clara perched proudly beside me. I touched the frame lightly. "You were mine once," I whispered. As I returned to my room, I noticed the faint outline of an envelope slipped under my door. I picked it up. It was blank. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed neatly, Silberkiefern Community Welcome Packet. Someone had slid it under as if it were a hotel brochure, as if my life were already booked for me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it. Then I folded it once, twice, and tucked it into the back of my notebook, not as a surrender, but as evidence. Later, I heard Lucas on the phone again. His voice carried through the thin walls. "Yes, Friday should be fine. He'll sign by then. Don't worry." He laughed softly. "He's too tired to fight." I smiled in the dark. They thought fatigue meant defeat. They didn't understand that stillness can be a kind of strength, the kind that waits for the right moment to strike with precision. Before bed, I pulled the envelope marked Baden title from my drawer once more, placed it beside the manila folder they'd given me, and looked at the two together. Their folder wanted to erase me. Mine wanted to remind them I could not be erased. The contrast was almost poetic. I lay down, hands folded over my chest, listening to the house settle into its bones. I thought of Anna, of her puzzles, of the patience she taught me without ever meaning to. And I whispered into the silence, "They believe they've written the last line of my story. But I still hold the pen." And with that, the plan had begun. Not with fury, not with noise, but with quiet, deliberate ink that would, in time, prove louder than any voice in this house. The day after the welcome packet slid under my door, the air inside the house carried a strange stillness, like the pause before a storm you know is on the horizon. I rose before sunrise, as I always did, my watch cold against my wrist, and let the quiet guide me. It wasn't fear that woke me now. It was purpose. I brewed coffee slowly, listening to the drip echo through the kitchen, letting its rhythm remind me of the factory floor in my younger years. I remembered Anna teasing me, saying I measured life by machines. Maybe she was right. Machines and patience, that was my trade. That morning, patience was the machine I needed most. When Clara came downstairs, hair still damp from the shower, she seemed almost rehearsed again, as if every gesture was something Lucas had approved before she left the bedroom. She nodded at me cautiously. "Morning, Vater." "Morning, Clara," I said. My voice was calm, but I watched her shoulders tense anyway. She poured cereal into a bowl, avoided my eyes, and ate quickly, like a woman late for a meeting. As she left for work, she said, "We'll talk tonight about arrangements." Arrangements. That word carried the weight of a coffin lid. I just nodded and let her leave, Kane tapping softly on the tile as I walked to the back porch. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. It reminded me of bonfires Clara and I once built in the yard, stacking logs too high and laughing when sparks flew. She used to believe I could keep fire under control. Now she wanted to believe I couldn't even keep myself. Lucas emerged a while later, dressed sharply for someone with nowhere important to go. He carried his phone in one hand, coffee in the other, smiling as though the world outside these walls couldn't see through the performance. He glanced at me sitting on the porch. "Heinrich, you should bundle up. It's getting cold." "I've lived through colder," I said, not moving. He tilted his head, trying to gauge if I meant the weather or something else. Then he turned away, muttering something into his phone. That was when I decided it was time to take the first real step, not against them directly, but around them, planting seeds. Anna would have called it cunning. I left the house late in the morning and walked to town. I stopped first at the bakery. Frau Jensen, the owner, greeted me warmly. "Heinrich, haven't seen you in a while. How's Clara treating you?" I smiled faintly. "Like a guest in my own house," I said. Her brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound right." I shrugged, letting the words hang in the air just long enough to settle in her mind. Then I bought a loaf of rye and left. Seeds don't need speeches, just a whisper of doubt in the right ear. Next, I visited the hardware store. Old Herr Braun behind the counter looked up from the register. "Heinrich, you need more nails already?" "Not nails this time," I said. "Just some sandpaper for the desk in my room. Thought I'd smooth the edges." He chuckled. "Always fixing something, huh?" "Better to fix wood than family," I answered softly. His eyes flicked up at me, curiosity sparked. I paid, thanked him, and left. Another seed, small but deliberate. By afternoon, I reached the small cafe where Wilhelm sometimes had lunch. He wasn't there yet, so I sat by the window and watched people pass. The young moved quickly, faces glued to their phones, oblivious to the world around them. The older ones walked more slowly, careful, carrying years like fragile glass. I belonged to neither group. I was something in between, slow in body, sharp in mind. When Wilhelm arrived, he greeted me with the same warmth as always. "Heinrich, you're out and about again. Twice in 2 days. I'll start thinking you like me." I smiled. "You always were the talkative one." We ordered sandwiches, and while we ate, I leaned in just slightly. Clara and Lucas already called someone. "Friday. They think I'll sign by then." Wilhelm's jaw tightened. "And will you?" I met his eyes. "No. But I want them to believe I might, for now." He nodded, understanding immediately. "So, you're letting them build their house of cards." "And when the wind blows," I said, "I won't have to lift a finger." We talked a little longer, then I left him to his work. As I walked home, I passed by Frau Meller again. She leaned over her fence, whispering, "Heinrich, I heard they've been calling about Silberkiefern. Is that true?" I gave her a weary smile. "People talk. Let them. Truth has a way of finding daylight." By the time I returned home, Lucas was pacing in the kitchen, on his phone. He lowered his voice when he saw me, but not enough. "Yes, Friday. We'll have the paperwork ready. He's stubborn, but he'll cave." Then louder, as if covering his tracks, "Oh, hi, Heinrich. Just confirming the plumber." "The plumber doesn't come on Fridays," I said quietly and walked past him. I didn't need to see his face to know the color had drained from it. That evening, Clara returned. She looked tired, worn down by numbers or people, or maybe by the silence she knew was waiting here. We ate dinner quietly. I let my fork scrape against the plate just enough to fill the silence. Afterward, I spoke for the first time. "You've been busy," I said. She froze. "What do you mean? Calls? Plans? Friday?" Her face hardened. "Fata, we're trying to do what's best for everyone. Don't make this harder." I looked at her, steady, calm. "Harder for who?" She didn't answer. She just pushed her plate away and stood. Lucas followed her out of the room, whispering something urgent. I remained alone at the table and let the quiet settle around me like armor. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I wrote, spoke to neighbors. Seeds planted. They whisper already. Lucas nervous. Clara defensive. Friday looms. They don't see the ground shifting under them. I closed the notebook and placed it in the folder again. The house creaked as the wind picked up outside. In the distance, I could hear the faint ring of a church bell from across town. It reminded me of Anna, of Sundays we spent together, of the way she believed time was a circle that always came back around. I whispered to her memory, "The circle's turning, Anna. They don't see it, but it's already begun." And as I turned off the lamp, I knew the seeds I had scattered that day were already taking root. All I had to do now was wait for them to grow. The morning after the seeds were planted, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that wasn't fear and wasn't fatigue. It was something closer to resolve. A man my age doesn't rise out of bed without aches. But that morning, the aches felt like armor. I dressed slowly, buttoned my flannel, slipped the notebook into my pocket, and stared for a moment at Anna's photograph on the dresser. She had been gone for years, yet her eyes still had a way of asking me silently, "And what will you do today, Heinrich?" I answered her by picking up my cane and stepping out the door before Clara or Lucas could corner me with their careful rehearsals. The autumn air bit sharply at my lungs, but I welcomed it. There are days you breathe for survival and days you breathe for clarity. This was the latter. I walked toward the east side of town, past houses that had sprouted zoo or coffin signs in the last year, prices rising, people cashing out, families moving away. It struck me then that was exactly how Clara and Lucas viewed me, as a house with equity, something to sell off, not a man, not a father, but an asset. The thought didn't sting. It solidified. It reminded me that I needed more than documents and memories. I needed a living ally. Wilhelm was already helping me on the legal side, but blood can only carry you so far. One name rose in my mind as naturally as breath: Franz Bauer. Franz and I had worked 30 years together at the factory. He had the kind of steady hands that could measure steel to the millimeter, and the kind of loyalty that didn't waver even when the foreman barked. Years back, when his boy got into trouble with the law, I had spoken up for him with the union rep, vouched for his character. Franz was the kind of man who repaid every debt twice over. I'd believed that was true then, and I hoped it was true now. I found him at the Stammtisch at the local Gasthaus, a place that smelled of coffee burned hours too long and would polish older than half the men who sat at the bar. Franz was leaning back in a chair, his cap tilted low, nursing a cup of black coffee. When he saw me, he grinned. "Heinrich, verdammt. Haven't seen you in months. Sit, sit." I lowered myself into the chair across from him. The old boards creaked beneath my weight, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two relics from the same era. "Franz," I said quietly, "I need a favor." His smile faded, replaced by the seriousness of a man who knows favors among old friends are never small. "What's going on?" I told him everything. I didn't rush it. I laid it out piece by piece, like tightening bolts on a machine, until the shape revealed itself. Clara's words, Lucas's folder, the notary, The Friday call, the Silberkiefern packet, the lean, the whispers around town. Through it all, Franz listened, his jaw tightening, his hand clenching the handle of his coffee mug. When I finished, he shook his head. Mein Gott, Heinrich. Your girl. I nodded. My girl. He let out a long breath. What do you need? I don't need fists, I said. I don't need fights. I need eyes, ears, maybe a hand or two if it comes to it. They're trying to paint me as weak. They don't know I still have roots. Franz leaned forward. You've got me. Hell, you vouched for my family when nobody else would. This is nothing compared to that. I felt something tighten in my throat, not weakness, but a reminder that gratitude still had a place in the world. I reached across the table and shook his hand. His grip was as firm as it had been when we worked side by side on the line. That handshake was more than a promise. It was a quiet alliance. We spent the next hour talking through what might come. Franz mentioned his cousin who worked at the district registry office, the very place where deeds and titles passed like currency. She can keep you updated if anyone tries to file something under your name, he said. Off the record. That would help, I admitted. And my nephew's in real estate, he added. If Lucas has been calling about listing, he'll hear it. That gossip moves fast. It struck me then how little Clara and Lucas understood the world they lived in. They thought they could maneuver quietly, but small towns don't keep secrets. Every phone call leaves an echo, every plan a trail of crumbs. I only needed someone to sweep them into my notebook. By the time I left the Gasthaus, the air felt lighter in my lungs. I wasn't walking back alone anymore. At home, Lucas was in the kitchen, his phone pressed tight to his ear. He glanced at me as I entered, then turned his back. Yes, Friday. He's stubborn, but we'll get him there. I promise. He caught himself, added quickly. No, just talking to the plumber. Thanks. The plumber again? I asked mildly, hanging my jacket. He jumped slightly. Yes, he's been hard to reach. I gave him a thin smile. Funny. Pipes haven't leaked once. Then I walked past him, cane steady, into the living room where Clara sat scrolling on her phone. She looked up, guilty, as though my presence itself accused her. Vater, she began. For who? I asked, the same question I'd asked before. This time, I didn't wait for the answer. I left her sitting there, her mouth half open, her excuses half formed. In my room, I opened the notebook and wrote, Met Franz. Alliance formed. Handshake stronger than ink. They don't know the walls have ears. Then I tucked the notebook back beneath the folder. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the floorboards, I sat on the porch again. I listened to the cicadas buzz, the crickets hum, the faint laughter of children playing down the block. For a moment, it almost felt like the world was normal again. But inside these walls, the storm was brewing, and I was no longer alone in facing it. After dinner, Clara tried again. She approached me while I washed my cup in the sink. Vater, we need to finalize things. Lucas has been working so hard on this. You're making it. She stopped herself before saying harder. I dried the cup, set it carefully on the rack, and looked at her. Clara, do you remember when you failed your driver's test? She blinked, caught off guard. What? You came home embarrassed, ready to hide it. I told you failure only stings when you hide it. And you went back and passed the next week. Do you remember that? She frowned. I guess. Then remember this, too. Erasing me won't erase your shame. It'll deepen it. One day you'll have to look in the mirror and see the woman who tried to evict her father. That reflection doesn't go away, Clara. Not with any signature. Her face reddened, her jaw clenched. You're twisting this. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm untwisting it." She left the room, muttering under her breath. Lucas followed soon after, whispering sharp words to her as they climbed the stairs. I didn't need to hear them. The distance in her footsteps told me enough. When the house settled into quiet, I sat back down at my desk. I placed my watch on the green notebook, the way my father once placed his hand on my shoulder, a reminder of time, of lineage, of meaning. I thought of Anna again, of the way she believed every small act mattered. "Heinrich," she used to say, "people think storms destroy, but sometimes storms reveal which trees had roots strong enough to stay." I smiled faintly into the dark. The storm was coming, but I had roots. And now I had an ally who remembered the debt I once paid and who would stand beside me when the wind began to howl. When I finally closed my eyes, it was not to the sound of loneliness, but to the echo of a handshake across a table, firm and steady, carrying me into the next day. The morning after I shook Franz's hand, I woke with a different kind of weight pressing on me. It wasn't the heaviness of betrayal, nor the quiet ache of memory. It was the weight a craftsman feels when the tools are finally laid out in front of him. The sense that the work can begin. 4 weeks, maybe months, I had been the anvil, bearing every hammer blow in silence. That morning, I realized I was also the hammer. I sat at my desk, opened my green notebook, and read over the lines I'd written the night before. Met Franz. Alliance formed. Handshake stronger than ink. My fingers traced the words like a man tracing the grooves in a piece of wood he's about to carve. Then I placed the notebook down and pulled open the drawer with my files. The crisp edges of paper, the neat tabs in my handwriting, the smell of manila folders, they felt steadier than any weapon I'd ever held. I slipped the file marked deed into a leather satchel, along with the lien and a copy of Anna's will. Not because I meant to brandish them, but because I meant to guard them. Evidence, like a blade, is useless if you leave it rusting. I tucked the satchel beneath my jacket, gripped my cane, and stepped out into the cool air. Lucas was at the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee, phone in hand. He raised his eyebrows when he saw me dressed neatly, jacket zipped, shoes polished. "Going somewhere, Heinrich?" "Errands," I said, the same word as before. His lips pressed into a line. He wanted to ask more, but didn't. He had started to learn that my silences weren't empty, they were loaded. I walked into town again, slow but steady, letting every tap of my cane remind me that weakness is sometimes the perfect disguise. The first stop was Wilhelm's office. When he saw the satchel, his eyes sharpened. "Heinrich," he said, closing the door behind me, "you look like a man about to file a lawsuit." "Not yet," I answered. "But I need you to hold these safe." "Quiet." He opened the satchel, pulled the folders out one by one, his lawyer's eyes scanning the stamps, the signatures, the notary marks from years ago. "These are gold," he said softly. "Anyone who tries to move on that house, this lien blocks them cold. And Anna's will names you executor. They'd have to crawl through glass to undo this." "Good," I said. "Keep them out of sight. Make copies if you must, but don't breathe a word." Wilhelm looked at me, lips curling into the faintest smile. "Heinrich, you're not just surviving this. You're setting the board." I didn't smile back. "I learned from Anna. You never play until you know the whole puzzle." We sat for a while, talking through scenarios. What if Clara and Lucas tried to file behind my back? What if they pressured a notary again? What if they attempted to move money from the joint account I had foolishly let Clara manage after Anna passed? For each what if, Wilhelm gave me an answer. Injunctions, notices, freezes. Every move they thought they could make, I had a counter now. When I left his office, I felt the same steadiness I'd felt 30 years ago, walking out of the factory after closing down a faulty machine. Back then, I knew lives depended on me catching what others missed. Now it was my dignity, my home, my meaning. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. "Morning, Heinrich," the clerk said. "Want me to forward your mail to Silberkiefern yet?" She meant it as a joke, but her smile faltered when she saw my face. "Not today," I said quietly. "Keep everything here, and if anyone asks about my forwarding address, you call me first." She nodded, embarrassed. Of course. Another seed planted. When I returned, Lucas was in the living room, flipping through papers too quickly when he heard my cane. He slid them into a folder, smiled thinly. "You've been busy," he said. "Better busy than useless," I replied. I saw the twitch in his cheek, the way his smile strained. Words, when calm, cut deeper than shouts. That evening, Clara came home late. Her scarf was loose, her eyes bloodshot. She tried to act casual, but casual doesn't come easily to guilty women. We sat at the table in silence until she cleared her throat. "Vater," she said finally, "we need to move on this. Lucas has been stressed. I've been stressed. We're not trying to hurt you. We just can't keep living like this." I set down my fork. "Like what?" Like there's no order, no plan." "There is a plan," I said evenly. "It's just not yours." She blinked. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I let the silence hang until she pushed her chair back and stood. Lucas hurried after her, whispering sharp things I couldn't catch. Or maybe I could have if I cared, but I didn't. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the satchel again. I laid out the folders, not to study them, but to remind myself of what I carried. Paper may seem fragile, but paper topples empires. A deed, a lien, a will. These were my quiet weapons. I wrote in the notebook, "Wilhelm holds the originals." Seeds at the post office. Lucas nervous. Clara cracking. Paper is stronger than fists. Then I turned off the lamp and listened to the house breathe. The next day, Franz called. "Heinrich, my cousin at the registry office, says Lucas has been sniffing around, asking about transfer timelines. He doesn't know your lien exists." "Good," I said. "Let him think the ground is solid." And my nephew heard from another agent. They've been asking about listings. He wants to know how fast a house can move. I chuckled softly. "They're sprinting toward a wall." Franz laughed, then grew serious. "You're not alone in this, Heinrich. Remember that." "I know," I said, and I did. Back at home, Lucas tried a new tactic. He knocked on my door mid-afternoon, carrying a tray with tea. "Heinrich, you must be tired. I made chamomile. It helps with stress." I looked at the cup, steaming gently, and then at him. "You drink it," I said. His smile faltered. He set the tray down and left without a word. That evening, Clara tried again. She stood in the doorway of my room, looking like a girl about to confess to breaking a window. "Vater, why are you fighting us?" "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm remembering." "Remembering what?" "That this house was built on my back. That trust isn't paperwork. That meaning isn't something you get to erase." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the floor. "We just thought it'd be easier." "Easier," I repeated. "For who?" She didn't answer. She just left. That night, I slipped the Baden title envelope from my drawer again and placed it beside the satchel. My watch ticked beside it, steady as a heartbeat. I thought of Anna, of her puzzles, of her patience. I thought of Franz, of Wilhelm, of the seeds planted in town. I whispered into the dark, "They think they've cornered me. They don't see I've already built the door." And with that, I knew the weapons were ready. Not guns, not fists, but the quiet strength of paper, allies, and patience. The storm was closer now, and when it broke, it would not be me who trembled. The first sign that the tide was turning didn't come with shouting or slammed doors, or even another set of neatly prepared papers. It came with the look on Clara's face when she answered her phone one Thursday morning, standing at the foot of the stairs in her pressed blouse and polished shoes. Her voice was careful, clipped, and then it broke with 3 words that told me more than she meant to. Denied. How? Denied. I sat at the table with my coffee cooling in front of me, pretending to read the paper while my ears caught every syllable. Clara's jaw tightened, her free hand clenching and unclenching as if she could squeeze the word denied into submission. Lucas hovered nearby, his lips pressed into a hard line, watching her the way a card player watches her partner fold too soon. When she hung up, the silence that followed was thicker than any argument we'd ever had. "Everything all right?" I asked softly, not looking up from the paper. "It's nothing," Clara snapped, too fast. "Must be," I said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "Nothing has a way of making people sweat." Her eyes flashed toward me, then away. Lucas put a hand on her arm, whispering something I couldn't catch, but I didn't need to. I already knew what that call was. The bank. The lean Wilhelm had quietly kept alive had done its work. My daughter, who thought she could erase me with a signature, had just discovered that the ground under her feet wasn't solid after all. The rest of the day passed with a nervous quiet. Clara left for work later than usual, muttering about meetings while Lucas stayed glued to his phone, pacing the kitchen tiles until he wore a faint path into them. I let them stew. Patience is its own kind of pressure. You don't need to raise your voice when time and truth are squeezing for you. That evening, Clara came home earlier than usual. She didn't sit in the living room like she normally did, scrolling on her phone to avoid conversation. Instead, she came straight to my room. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darting from my cane to the desk where the notebook Saturday. "Fata," she said finally. "We need to talk." I looked up slowly. "We've been talking, Clara. You just haven't been listening." Her jaw clenched. "The bank said there's a lien from you, from years ago. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you never asked," I said. She stepped inside, voice rising. "You made it impossible for us to move forward. Do you realize what you've done?" I rose carefully from the chair, leaning on my cane, meeting her eyes level. "What I've done," I said evenly, "is protect what's mine. What your mother and I built. What you forgot." Lucas appeared behind her, his face taut with frustration. "Heinrich, this isn't fair. We've been trying to set things up for you, to make sure you're cared for, and you're sabotaging it." I almost laughed. "Cared for? Is that what you call it? Scheduling a notary behind my back, sliding Silberkiefern brochures under my door? That's not care. That's convenience." Clara looked away, ashamed or angry. I couldn't tell which. Lucas, though, held my gaze with a kind of icy determination. "You can't stay here forever, Heinrich. One way or another, this house will belong to us. That lien won't last." I tapped the floor once with my cane, slow and deliberate. "Long enough," I said. He turned on his heel, dragging Clara out with him, whispering furiously as they climbed the stairs. I sat back down, opened the notebook, and wrote, "First crack visible." They know the lien exists. Fear in their voices, anger in Lucas's eyes. The storm is closer. The next morning, I took a walk to the corner store. As I moved through the aisles, I noticed 2 neighbors whispering near the canned goods. They stopped when I passed, but not before I heard my name. "Heinrich's daughter tried to sell the house," one muttered. "Bank shut it down." The other clucked his tongue. "Shameful. Poor Heinrich." I didn't correct them. Seeds, once planted, don't need water from the gardener. Gossip grows on its own. By the time I reached the register, Frau Jensen behind the counter was already shaking her head at me with sympathy. "Families," she said softly. "Sometimes they forget who held them up." On the way home, I stopped at Franz's. He was sitting on his porch, smoking his pipe, eyes sharp as ever. "Heard the bank clipped their wings," he said with a grin. I sat beside him, letting the smoke curl between us. "First pressure point," I said. He nodded. "They'll scramble now. Watch them. People show their true faces when the ground shifts." He was right. That evening, the true faces began to show. Clara came home restless, pacing the living room. That night, I slipped the Baden title envelope from my drawer again and placed it beside the satchel. My watch ticked beside it, steady as a heartbeat. I thought of Anna, of her puzzles, of her patience. I thought of Franz, of Wilhelm, of the seeds planted in town. I whispered into the dark, "They think they've cornered me. They don't see I've already built the door." And with that, I knew the weapons were ready. Not guns, not fists, but the quiet strength of paper, allies, and patience. The storm was closer now, and when it broke, it would not be me who trembled. The first sign that the tide was turning didn't come with shouting or slammed doors, or even another set of neatly prepared papers. It came with the look on Clara's face when she answered her phone one Thursday morning, standing at the foot of the stairs in her pressed blouse and polished shoes. Her voice was careful, clipped, and then it broke with 3 words that told me more than she meant to. "Denied." "How?" "Denied." I sat at the table with my coffee cooling in front of me, pretending to read the paper while my ears caught every syllable. Clara's jaw tightened, her free hand clenching and unclenching as if she could squeeze the word denied into submission. Lucas hovered nearby, his lips pressed into a hard line, watching her the way a card player watches her partner fold too soon. When she hung up, the silence that followed was thicker than any argument we'd ever had. "Everything all right?" I asked softly, not looking up from the paper. "It's nothing," Clara snapped, too fast. "Must be," I said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "Nothing has a way of making people sweat." Her eyes flashed toward me, then away. Lucas put a hand on her arm, whispering something I couldn't catch, but I didn't need to. I already knew what that call was. The bank. The lean Wilhelm had quietly kept alive had done its work. My daughter, who thought she could erase me with a signature, had just discovered that the ground under her feet wasn't solid after all. The rest of the day passed with a nervous quiet. Clara left for work later than usual, muttering about meetings while Lucas stayed glued to his phone, pacing the kitchen tiles until he wore a faint path into them. I let them stew. Patience is its own kind of pressure. You don't need to raise your voice when time and truth are squeezing for you. That evening, Clara came home earlier than usual. She didn't sit in the living room like she normally did, scrolling on her phone to avoid conversation. Instead, she came straight to my room. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darting from my cane to the desk where the notebook Saturday. "Fata," she said finally. "We need to talk." I looked up slowly. "We've been talking, Clara. You just haven't been listening." Her jaw clenched. "The bank said there's a lien from you, from years ago. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you never asked," I said. She stepped inside, voice rising. "You made it impossible for us to move forward. Do you realize what you've done?" I rose carefully from the chair, leaning on my cane, meeting her eyes level. "What I've done," I said evenly, "is protect what's mine. What your mother and I built. What you forgot." Lucas appeared behind her, his face taut with frustration. "Heinrich, this isn't fair. We've been trying to set things up for you, to make sure you're cared for, and you're sabotaging it." I almost laughed. "Cared for? Is that what you call it? Scheduling a notary behind my back, sliding Silberkiefern brochures under my door? That's not care." That's convenience. Clara looked away, ashamed or angry. I couldn't tell which. Lucas, though, held my gaze with a kind of icy determination. You can't stay here forever, Heinrich. One way or another, this house will belong to us. That lien won't last. I tapped the floor once with my cane, slow and deliberate. Long enough, I said. He turned on his heel, dragging Clara out with him, whispering furiously as they climbed the stairs. I sat back down, opened the notebook, and wrote, "First crack visible." They know the lien exists. Fear in their voices, anger in Lucas's eyes. The storm is closer. The next morning, I took a walk to the corner store. As I moved through the aisles, I noticed two neighbors whispering near the canned goods. They stopped when I passed, but not before I heard my name. Heinrich's daughter tried to sell the house, one muttered. Bank shut it down. The other clucked his tongue. Shameful. Poor Heinrich. I didn't correct them. Seeds, once planted, don't need water from the gardener. Gossip grows on its own. By the time I reached the register, Frau Jensen behind the counter was already shaking her head at me with sympathy. Families, she said softly. Sometimes they forget who held them up. On the way home, I stopped at Franz's. He was sitting on his porch, smoking his pipe, eyes sharp as ever. Heard the bank clipped their wings, he said with a grin. I sat beside him, letting the smoke curl between us. First pressure point, I said. He nodded. They'll scramble now. Watch them. People show their true faces when the ground shifts. He was right. That evening, the true faces began to show. Clara came home restless, pacing the living room. Lucas cornered her, hissing in low tones that drifted up the stairs to my room. Words like embarrassment, neighbors, and stupid lien floated through the air. At one point, Clara's voice cracked. "What do you want me to do, Lucas?" "He's my father." The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. When Lucas finally replied, his voice was low and cold. "Not for long." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of those words settle. Not for long. They thought they were pushing me out. They didn't realize they were pushing themselves into a corner. Later that night, I picked up the phone and called Wilhelm. "They know about the lien," I said. "Good," he replied. "Let them chew on it." "They'll fight harder now," I warned. "Then we'll hold harder," he said simply. I hung up, set the phone down, and returned to my desk. I opened Anna's old Bible, kept tucked in the drawer, and flipped to a page she had once underlined. "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." I whispered into the quiet, "You see, Anna? They tried to erase me, but it's me holding the house together." The following day, Lucas tried a new tactic. He came to my door with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Heinrich, we were thinking, maybe we rush things. Maybe we can talk about arrangements that feel more comfortable." I looked at him steadily. "Comfort is not what you're after, Lucas. Control is." His smile faltered. "Why do you always assume the worst?" "Because you've shown it," I said, "again and again." He left quickly after that, but the unease in his eyes lingered like a shadow. That evening, Clara came into my room alone. She sat on the edge of the chair, rubbing her hands together. "Vater," she said, voice low, "I didn't know about the notary until Lucas set it up. I swear. I didn't stop it. That's on me." I studied her for a long time. For a moment, I saw the girl with the oversized baseball glove, waiting at the end of the driveway. "Clara," I said quietly, "you've forgotten what loyalty looks like. And once a woman forgets that, it's hard to remember again." She dropped her head into her hands. "I don't know what to do." "Then do nothing," I said. "Sometimes that's the wisest choice." She left without another word. When the house fell quiet again, I sat back at my desk, pulled the Baden title envelope from the drawer, and placed it beside the notebook. My watch ticked beside them, steady as a heartbeat. I wrote one final line for the night. The first crack has appeared. Tomorrow the pressure grows. And I knew then that the storm had begun to howl, and that it would not be me left trembling when it finally broke. The morning after Clara's voice cracked on the phone with the bank, the air in the house carried a weight that didn't belong to me anymore. It was theirs. I could hear it in the way Lucas's heels clicked sharper on the hardwood, in the way Clara shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling, the way their whispers stopped the moment my cane tapped across the floor. Fear makes a house louder. That was my first sign that the pressure was working. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table. The steam rose in front of me, curling like smoke signals. Clara came down the stairs with her scarf half knotted, her eyes shadowed. She muttered a good morning without looking at me, then fiddled with her phone as if waiting for a miracle text that would undo the call from yesterday. Lucas followed close behind, polished as always, his phone already at his ear. He gave me a smile that looked more like a grimace, then turned his back, whispering quickly into the receiver. I didn't need to hear every word. It was enough to catch liquidate and timeline before he stepped into the hallway. I sipped my coffee and let the silence fill the room until Clara finally spoke. "Fata," she said, her voice low, "you don't understand what you've done. This lean ties everything up." I looked at her, steady. "I understand perfectly. That's why I did it." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't reply. She just grabbed her briefcase and left, Lucas close on her heels. The door closed behind them harder than it needed to. I stayed at the table long after they left, staring at the linden coaster beneath my mug. I had carved it years ago from a fallen branch, sanding it smooth while Anna read on the porch. She had laughed then, saying, "You give even broken things new purpose." That memory steadied me. Later that morning, I stepped outside, letting the crisp air clear my lungs. The neighbor across the street, Herr Wagner, waved me over. He was a quiet man, usually too busy with his garden to bother with gossip. But that day, his face was tight with something unsaid. "Heinrich," he began, lowering his voice though no one else was near. "I don't like to meddle, but I overheard Clara at the hardware store yesterday. She was talking to the clerk about refinancing. Sounded like she was upset. Mentioned your name more than once." I studied Herr Wagner for a moment. He was the kind of man who measured words carefully, not prone to exaggeration. "And what did she say, exactly?" "She said, 'My father's making this impossible. He won't let go.'" Herr Wagner shifted uneasily. "Look, I don't know what's going on in your house, but folks are talking. Some say Clara's trying to push you out. Others say you're the one holding her hostage. I figured you should know." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Herr Wagner. Talking is what towns do best." As I walked back, I thought about how quickly the story had started to spread. Rumors are like kindling. Once the spark catches, the fire takes on a life of its own. But unlike fire, rumors don't just destroy. They also illuminate. They make people look closer. And sometimes they make people choose sides. By the time I reached home, Franz had already called. "Heinrich," he said, his voice low but steady, "my cousin at the registry office told me Lucas tried to request a copy of the deed. He was angry when they told him he couldn't access it without you. He left in a huff." Words spreading. "Good," I said. "Let them chase shadows." That afternoon, Lucas cornered me in the kitchen. His smile was brittle, his tone falsely sweet. "Heinrich," the neighbors seemed concerned. "Frau Jensen at the bakery asked me if everything was all right. Did you say something?" I stirred sugar into my tea slowly. "I said the truth, Lucas. People can decide what to do with it. His eyes flashed. You're making us look like villains. I looked at him calmly. I don't have to make you look like anything. People see for themselves. He opened his mouth to retort but closed it again, pressing his lips tight. Then he stormed out, his heels snapping against the floor like gunfire. That evening, as the sun slipped low, Clara came into my room. She didn't sit. She just stood there, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Fata, this is getting out of hand. Everyone's talking. Lucas is furious. You need to stop. Stop what? I asked softly. Stop making us the enemy. I leaned on my cane, meeting her eyes. You don't become the enemy because of what I say, Clara. You become the enemy because of what you do. She flinched, and for a moment I saw the girl she had once been, ashamed after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball. Back then, she had come to me in tears, begging me to fix it. I had told her the only way to fix it was to knock on the neighbor's door herself, admit the mistake, and offer to pay. That lesson had stayed with her for years, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped knocking. She left without another word. That night, I wrote in my notebook, neighbors whispering. Herr Wagner neutral no longer, leaning toward me. Clerk confirmed Lucas's panic. Clara cracking. They can't control the story anymore. The next day, the whispers turned into open conversations. At the post office, two women I barely knew approached me. Heinrich, is it true your daughter's trying to sell your house from under you? One asked. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was sympathetic, almost protective. I didn't confirm, didn't deny. I just said, daughters forget. Sometimes fathers remember. They nodded solemnly, their eyes soft with pity, and walked away. By the time I reached home, I knew the town wasn't neutral anymore. They were watching. And in a small town, being watched is sometimes worse than being judged. That evening, as I sat on the porch with my cane resting against my leg, Herr Wagner came by again. He stood at the bottom of the steps, clearing his throat. Heinrich, if you ever need someone to vouch for you, about the lien, about the house, I'll stand by you. Folks trust me. They know I don't talk unless it matters. I looked at him, surprised. Herr Wagner had always been neutral, keeping his nose to his garden, his ears out of trouble. But now he had stepped across the line. Thank you, Herr Wagner, I said. I may take you up on that. That night I sat at my desk, the satchel open, the papers spread before me like pieces of a puzzle. My watch ticked steadily, a reminder that time itself was on my side. I wrote in the notebook, Herr Wagner crossed over. The town sees. Rumors are no longer mine to spread. They live on their own. Lucas and Clara think they can control the house, but the house has already chosen its witness. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle. The storm was almost here, and it was no longer just my storm. It was theirs, too. And when the wind shifted, it shifted in my favor. The morning it all came to a head was gray. The kind of gray that seeps into the walls, into the bones of the house, into the silence between people. I woke before dawn, as always, sitting on the edge of my bed with the watch ticking faintly against my wrist, the green notebook open in front of me. I wrote one sentence. Today, something will break, and it won't be me. Then I closed it, slipped it into my jacket, and listened to the stillness of a house about to turn itself inside out. Downstairs, Lucas was already pacing, phone in hand. His voice was sharp, brittle, carrying just enough for me to hear. Yes, I know, but the lien can't last forever. He's old. He'll give in. He has to. Just hold the buyer a little longer. His words cut off when he saw me at the bottom of the stairs. He smiled too quickly, covering the phone. Morning, Heinrich. Coffee's on the counter. Thank you, I said evenly, walking past him to pour a cup. The kitchen felt smaller with him in it, his cologne mixing with the bitter scent of panic he tried so hard to mask. Clara came down moments later, face pale, scarf knotted too tight. She avoided my eyes, muttering something about a meeting. But she didn't leave. She lingered in the doorway, shifting from foot to foot as though waiting for permission for Lucas to speak. "What's the matter, Liebling?" I asked softly. She looked up, startled, her mouth opened, then closed. "Finally," she said, "the bank called again. They won't move forward. Not with the lien." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence do most of the talking. "Paper," I said at last, "has more patience than people. That's what I've always told you." She flinched as if the words themselves had weight. Lucas cut in, his tone sharp. "Heinrich, this has gone far enough. You're humiliating us. The neighbors are talking. The bank is treating us like fools. And all because you won't sign one piece of paper." I set my cup down gently. One piece of paper built this house. One piece of paper kept you afloat when you couldn't afford the down payment. And one piece of paper is keeping me here now. If you think paper doesn't matter, Lucas, then you've never truly lived with consequences. His face flushed, his eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a gavel. Clara hurried to answer it. When the door swung open, there stood Franz, solid as the oak he'd once cut for his porch beams. Beside him was Herr Wagner, hat in hand, his eyes steady. Behind them, a man in a gray suit I recognized from the bank, holding a folder. "Morning," Franz said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Figured we should all sit down." Lucas stiffened. "What is this?" Herr Wagner spoke quietly, but his words cut sharply. "It's the truth, Lucas. Folks around town deserve to know it, and so does the bank. Heinrich has every right to be here. More right than you've given him credit for." The banker cleared his throat, opening his folder. "Herr Schmidt's lien is valid and enforceable. Until it's resolved, no sale or refinance can proceed. Legally, the property cannot be transferred without his signature, and based on our records, he has no intention of providing it." Clara's shoulders slumped as if someone had pulled the strings holding her upright. Lucas's face went white, then red. "You can't just show up here and humiliate us in our own home," he hissed. I leaned on my cane, watching them both unravel. "I didn't ask them to come. The truth has a way of walking through the door on its own." Clara looked at me, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. Fear, yes, but also recognition. Recognition of the father who had once steadied her through storms, the man she had underestimated. "Vater," she began, but her voice cracked. I raised a hand gently. "Don't. You said I had no meaning in this house anymore. But it seems the house disagrees." Lucas turned on her, his fury spilling out. "This is your fault, Clara. You said it would be easy. You said he'd fold, and now look, everyone's laughing at us." His words echoed down the hall, sharp and cruel, the kind that linger long after they're spoken. Clara shrank under them, her face drawn tight, shame etched across it. Franz stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Enough. Heinrich doesn't need to fight you by shouting. He has the law. He has the town. And he has friends who won't stand by while you try to erase him. This ends now." The room went quiet, the only sound the steady tick of my watch. Lucas's chest heaved, his hands trembling, but he said nothing. Clara dropped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I turned to the banker. "Thank you for clarifying." He nodded. "I'll update the file. Unless Herr Schmidt chooses otherwise, nothing moves forward." With that he left, leaving the weight of his words hanging in the air. Herr Wagner tipped his hat. "Heinrich, You ever need a witness? I'll stand by you." Then he, too, stepped out, the door closing softly behind him. Franz lingered a moment longer, his eyes meeting mine. He gave a slight nod, a reminder of the handshake that had started this alliance, then followed the others out. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas stood rigid, his eyes fixed on me with a hatred he didn't bother to hide. Clara sat, broken, her hands covering a face that had once looked so much like mine. Finally, I spoke. "This house isn't just wood and nails. It's history. It's meaning. And meaning doesn't vanish because someone is impatient. You both thought you could write me out. But you forgot I've been writing longer than you've been alive." I picked up my cane, walked past them, and climbed the stairs slowly but steadily. At the top, I paused and looked back. Clara lifted her head, her eyes wet, her mouth open as if to speak, but no words came. Lucas stood beside her, his fists clenched, his face set in stone. I left them there in the wreckage of their own making and returned to my room. I sat at the desk, opened my notebook, and wrote, "Today, the storm broke." Clara crumbled. Lucas raged. The house held, and I remained. As I set down the pen, the weight I had carried for weeks eased slightly. Not gone, not forgotten, but lighter. Outside, the gray clouds parted just enough for a sliver of sunlight to touch the linden stump in the yard. Anna would have called it a sign. I closed the notebook, placed my watch on top, and whispered into the quiet, "The day of collapse has come." And it wasn't mine.